to the Jim Bakker Show. Coming to you from the village of Morningside, snuggled in the beautiful Ozark Mountains. Today, Jim's special guest, James Rickards, Michael Snyder. I'm Zach Drew, along with the Morningside Band. And now, direct from Gray Street at Morningside, here are your hosts, Jim and Lori Bakker.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Gray Street. So glad to have you here. You worked on Wall Street for about 35 years, did somebody tell me?
That's right, yeah. From the late 70s until very recent. Actually, I still advise the mutual funds, so I guess I'm still in the industry, but I do a lot of other things as well.
And now, if I understand your works correctly, you believe that another tremendous crisis is coming. And if I understand correctly, you believe that'll be worse than the previous crisis. So
no lessons were learned. The lessons that should have been learned, the lessons I learned, and the lessons I've been applying ever since, is that derivatives are dangerous. Leverage is dangerous. Letting the banks have too much power is dangerous, etc. There are a whole host of things. And
how can they keep printing money? I mean, just a stupid, simple kindergarten question. You know, if my kids started printing money in the basement, they'd be in trouble, you know. But how can we keep doing this? And it's not really the government printing the money, right?
Well, the Federal Reserve
is that government?
Well, it's a hybrid, Pastor, but it's mostly privately owned. It's a crazy system. By the way, that was by design. This came in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson. And the funny thing is, it's our central bank, but the United States had two central banks before. We had a central bank in the late 18th century up till 1816, I believe. And then we had another central bank, to 1814, and then we had another central bank from 1816 to 1836. Andrew Jackson got rid of the second bank of the United States, the second central bank of the United States. By the way, that was the last time America was debt-free. When Andrew Jackson stepped down as president, America did not owe any money to anybody. The federal debt is zero. It's been going up ever since. So come 1913, when the elites, and backed by the Rockefellers and others, said that we need a new central bank, they said, whatever you do, don't call it the central bank, because Americans hate central banks. Give it some funny name. So they gave it the name Federal Reserve System. It hurts your head, right? Yeah. But why not call it the Central Bank of the United States? Because they know that it was a deception. They know Americans hate central banks. So they call it the Federal Reserve System, so you wouldn't know what it was. There are 12 regions, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, St. Louis, etc. And those regional banks are owned by private banks. It's a privately owned system. But the president appoints the board of governors. So it's a strange mixture of private ownership and political control. Probably the worst of all possible mixtures.
Wow.
Let me just mention, we have a special on the two books. If you really want information about the financial system, I have these books now. I just got my hands on them. Currency Wars, The Death of Money.
Right.
In these books, as I've studied just a little bit about them, is the answers to my questions. Because I don't know who's lying. Do you ever wonder who in the world, who's lying to us? Where's the money going? What's happening? Is Wall Street telling us the truth? It's like going to buy a new Ford. You'd expect the Ford dealer to not say it if Ford was having a problem. They wouldn't necessarily want to tell you about, don't buy this Ford because it's got some problems. And you wouldn't expect stockbrokers to tell you don't invest in the stock market. Right. Is that right?
That's exactly right. The way I think about it, Pastor, is if you have a health problem, you don't think you have to go to medical school. You call your doctor. Mm-hmm. If you have a legal problem, you don't think you have to go to law school. You call your lawyer.
Right.
That's because you trust your doctor and you trust your lawyer. Mm-hmm. But if you have financial planning or financial problems, it'd be nice to think that you could call Wall Street, but you can't. You can't trust them, and you know that. And so people are, I call it self-medicating. They're getting an education. These books are written for everyday Americans, so everybody can understand it, whether it's books or newsletters or other programs such as this. People are, I always say, when it comes to your own money, everybody has a PhD. People are very smart when it comes to their own money, but they do feel that they've got to kind of go out and self-educate, and that's a good thing because you can't trust Wall Street because they've got nothing but conflicts of interest.
So we have the what are we calling this offer?
This is called the Money Wars offer.
For $75
yes,
one?
Yes, and that also includes, so it's the Currency Wars book and also the Death of Money and the Prophetic Conference, which has Rabbi on it and Joel Richardson, of course, James Rickards, Michael Snyder, Lieutenant General Boykin, Hugh B. Sin. It's, I mean, this is just
So the whole packet
information.
then, you can get that. This is information from all of these people, up to date. You need this information. You need to know what's going on. You need truth.
Yes.
You really need truth. And, you know, when I read what you had said about we're actually in a depression right now, and we've been in one, that's pretty shocking information.
Mm-hmm.
It's true, and probably a good idea to define what we mean by a depression, because
Yes.
people say, you know, recession you've heard about, has a technical definition. 2 consecutive quarters of declining economic growth. So economic growth goes down 2 quarters in a row, a couple other bells and whistles about employment. That's a recession. Depression is not well defined. People say, well, if a recession is 2 quarters and depression sounds worse, so what is that, 4 quarters or 10 quarters? That's not the definition. You can have growth in a depression. What a depression means is that your growth is depressed relative to your potential. The potential growth in the United States is 3.5%. We've done it for decades. We're completely capable of that. American hard work, savings, ingenuity, technology, we are capable of growing 3.5%. For the last 10 years, we've barely been growing about 2%. That gap between 3.5% and 2%, that's depressed growth, and that's what I mean by a depression. And by the way, that was John Maynard Keynes' definition going back to the 1930s. Now, gee, 1% doesn't sound a lot. Oh, if trend is 3% and growth is 2%, what's the big deal? It's only 1%. You take 1% and compound it over half a lifetime, one society will be twice as rich as the other. The compounding effect is very, very powerful. 1.5% growth added on, compounded over 35 years. Let's say you're born, you have a baby, right? 35 years later, and then take another 35 years, double it again until that person's 70. So an average lifetime, one society will be 4 times richer than the other. So this is lost wealth. And by the way, this wealth will never be regained. We've already lost it. The best you could do is try to get back to trend. Even that is doubtful. But this gap between the 3% and the 2%, this gap is a wealth gap, output gap, whatever you want to call it. It's lost wealth. We're never getting it back. That's what's going on. Everyone will say, well, the economy is growing. Well, it is growing. It's not growing enough. And more importantly, it's not growing to potential.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, The Death of Money, you talk about a project from the Pentagon called the War Games. And they ask you to conduct this war game.
Right.
Tell me about it. And it's in this book, The Death of Money.
Right. Pastor, there's a lot of national security in the book, The Death of Money, so you're right about that. The war game, we actually start in Currency Wars, first 2 chapters of Currency Wars, but I was asked by the Pentagon. I had mentioned after 9/11, I was asked by the Pentagon to advise them on a lot of national security issues, but in particular, I got a call. They said, we want to conduct the first ever financial war game. Now, the Pentagon's been doing war games for decades. They did not need any help from me on a normal war game with submarines or missiles or drones or anything else. But this was going to be a financial war game. It was the first time they ever did it. And they wanted some financial expertise. So we did this. So I was on the game design team, and then I actually got to play the game over a couple of days. So we had to, I call it playing Risk for adults. You know, we did it at a top secret weapons laboratory halfway between Washington and Baltimore called the Applied Physics Laboratory. And this is all, I won't go on too long, this is all in the first 2 chapters of Currency Wars. So how many days would it be? What would the teams be? You know, and some of it's obvious. So you have a Russia team, a China team, a U.S. team. But we said, well, look, if this is going to be a financial war, banks and hedge funds are going to be a part of it. So we had a separate team for banks and hedge funds. And just to make it realistic, we had a little back channel communication. I recruited, well, what I said to them, they have a list of what I call the usual suspects. So we had people, uniformed military, 3-star generals, CIA, FBI, Treasury Department, Federal Reserve, think tanks, professors. They always come to these things. But I said to the sponsors, I said, look, wars are all about lying, cheating, and deception. If you want it to be realistic, I need to invite some of my friends from Wall Street. So they agreed to that, and I invited some people I knew from some of the big banks. And one guy was a Russia expert, so I sort of steered him on the Russia team, and I got to play the China team. And we cooked up a plot over oysters in the restaurant in my town. We said, okay, here's the deal. China and Russia will take all their gold and put it in a vault in Switzerland. Then they will start a new bank in London, and this bank will issue new money backed by the gold. But here was the kicker. From now on, if you wanted Russian natural resource exports or Chinese manufactured goods, you could only pay for it with the new money. They would no longer accept dollars. The dollar was no longer money good. This was a threat to U.S. national security, clearly designed to run the dollar off the road. And then if you wanted this money, well, how could you get some? Well, you could borrow it. You could put your own gold in the vault. They would give you some money, or you could run a trade surplus and earn some. Now, we knew this was not anything that was going to happen the next day or the next year. The point of a war game is to look over the horizon and give the Pentagon a heads up as to future threats. Fair to say, and I talk about this in the book, we were ridiculed. I'm sure Harvard's a fine school, probably have some Harvard graduates here, but this one Harvard professor just laughed in my face and said, why are you wasting our time? Don't you know that gold is not part of the international monetary system? It never will be. This is a waste of time. We said, let's just play it out and see how it plays out. And it played out in very interesting ways. When I got home, I said to my wife, I said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is my team won. Bad news is I played China. So,
Oh, dear Lord.
But here's the point. What has happened? What has happened since 2009? Russia has more than doubled its gold reserves. They more than doubled their gold reserves. China has increased its gold reserves by about 400%. No one knows the exact number because they lie about it, but we do have some information. So Russia and China are behaving exactly the way we warned the Pentagon. Now, they haven't blown up the dollar yet, but they're moving down that path. So in hindsight, I think we did a good job of issuing a warning. And I talked to one of the top officials at the Pentagon in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, a fellow named Andy Marshall. He just retired recently. He's 92 years old, believe it or not. He was their top futurist. I said, Mr. Marshall, I said, the time will come when a U.S. cruiser will pull up at a fuel dock in Singapore, and you'll say, fill her up with fuel, and the operator will say, fine, pay me in SDRs. And for the first time, the U.S. will have a very expensive forward-deployed military that you have to pay for in a currency that you don't print. And he took that, he said, that's right, that's a threat to national security.
Mm-hmm.
All right, headlines. This is great stuff. I could go for years.
Mm-hmm. This is so
All right,
good.
exclusive. Iran wants euro payments for new and outstanding oil sales. I'm giving you current headlines. New. This is just news. It just I'm going to go through fairly rapidly, but comment on a couple of these things. This is now stuff.
Sure. This is a big deal. This goes back to 1974 and what's called the petrodollar deal, and I'll explain that very quickly.
Yes.
You know, for those, I'm sure a lot of you remember 1974, oil prices were quadrupling. The U.S., we had 3 recessions between 1974 and 1981. It looked like the dollar was collapsing. Gold went from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce, a 25 times increase. So it looked like the world was falling apart at the time. I was actually in the White House invited in to consult with Henry Kissinger's deputy, Helmut Sonnenfeld. We talked about this at the time. So Henry Kissinger came up with a deal because the Saudis were buying gold and it looked like the end of the dollar back then. And Kissinger said, look, to the Saudis, said, do the following. You price oil in dollars. Oil doesn't have to be priced in dollars. It could have been priced in yen, Swiss francs, at the time the German Deutschmark, gold. There are a lot of ways to price oil. He said, you price it in dollars. And then take the dollars and put it in the U.S. banks. The U.S. banks will lend it to South America, and then they'll buy our stuff, and we'll keep the world economy going. Let's just get this game cranked up again. But here's the point. Not everybody likes dollars necessarily, but everybody needs oil. If oil is priced in dollars and you need oil, you need dollars. whether you like it or not. So this put a floor under the dollar. This propped up the dollar all these years. Now what's happening, Pastor Jim? You read the headline. Iran is saying, yeah, we're going to sell oil, sure, but we're going to price it in euros. We don't want dollars. This is the beginning of the unraveling of the petrodollar deal. So imagine that the dollar is on a platform with 4 legs. We're starting to pull the legs out from under the platform.
China's got a lot of gold. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that somehow and how, just summary a little bit, going to endanger the American dollar? I mean, they're stacking gold.
Yes.
But there's no doubt about it.
Thousands.
We don't have a lot of gold, I don't think, do we, in the United
The
States?
United States has about 8,000 tons. That's the most of any country in the world. Europe, if you combine all the members of the Euros, that's 19 countries. But if you put them all together, they have about 10,000 tons.
Well, last week we found out Canada had about 27 pounds
Ounces or something,
ounces
and
of
then it
gold.
ended up being zero.
And then
yes.
the next week we found out that that was sold. So Canada basically has no gold.
Canada has no gold. That is correct.
Is that right?
That is correct. They didn't have.
So we have an expert here now. We can find out for sure on these
Canada
things.
has, what's interesting, and I talk about this in the book, The New Case for Gold. The U.S. I'll give you the figures quick. In 1950, we had 20,000 tons of gold. That's the United States. 1950, we had 20,000 tons. By 1970, we were down to 9,000 tons. Where did the 11,000 tons go? Well, it went to our trading partners. Europe and Japan traded with us. They ran a surplus. And in those days, under the Bretton Woods deal, if you had dollars, you could take them and cash them into the Treasury and get gold. Now, American citizens couldn't. From 1933 to 1975, it was illegal for American citizens to own gold. It was like drugs or contraband. I mean, you could go to jail for owning gold. And President Ford repealed that. But at the time, U.S. citizens could not own gold, but our trading partners, if they had dollars, they could cash them in and get gold. So where did our 11,000 tons? 3,000 tons to Germany, 2,000 tons to Italy, 2,000 tons to France, 600 tons to Japan, and so on. This is where the gold went. Well, by 1970, there was a run on the bank. All of a sudden, people were losing confidence in the dollar. They were cashing in dollars as fast as they could. It was very clear that the U.S. was going to be out of gold in a matter of years. France, Spain, Switzerland, they were just cashing in. So that's when President Nixon shut the gold window. He said, no more gold. From now on, if you have dollars, you can buy stocks and bonds. There we go, stocks again. Stocks, bonds, real estate. You can buy Rockefeller Center. You can buy assets, but you can't have the gold. Now, what's interesting is at the time we had 9,000 tons. Between 1971 and 1980, we lost another 1,000. We dumped 1,000 tons of gold on the market to suppress the price. And you think stocks are manipulated. Gold is one of the most manipulated markets out there. We got the IMF to dump 700 tons. So 1,700 tons of gold, which is a lot of gold, were dumped on the market to suppress the price. In 1980, we stopped. The amount of gold we have today in 2016 is approximately the same as the amount of gold that we had in 1980. We have not lost any gold in 36 years. Why? Why did we stop at 8,000 tons? Why didn't we keep going? The answer is in my book, in the New Case for Gold, because where did the gold come from? The U.S. Treasury stole it from the Federal Reserve. You think the Federal Reserve are bad guys. The Treasury, this was back in the 1930s and 1940s. So first the private banks had it. They gave it to the Federal Reserve by law. Then the Treasury took it from the Federal Reserve. Fort Knox was built to hold all this gold. But remember I said the Federal Reserve is private, the Treasury is public. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says you cannot take private property without just compensation, right? So what was the just compensation to the private system for taking the gold? They gave them a paper gold certificate. So the Federal Reserve has a paper gold certificate on its balance. This is all public, by the way. You can just look at the balance sheet, okay? Now, I was curious about that. I looked at it, and they value it at $42 an ounce. That's the historic value. We all know gold's about $1,250, fluctuate, $1,250 an ounce. It's valued at $42. And it showed the value. So I said, well, take that number, divide it by 42. That'll give me the number of ounces. And how much gold is represented by that? Turns out the answer is 8,000 tons. Exactly the same amount of gold as the Treasury has. So what this tells me is, no one will admit this, but what this tells me is that the Treasury can't sell any more gold. because they owe it to the Federal Reserve, at least on paper.
Oh.
So if the U.S. is done selling gold, what do? We got to get everybody else to sell gold, which we did.
China's buying up American companies fast, and this is a kind of crazy headline, and it's freaking people out.
Right. Well, one of my roles for the intelligence community, for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, they're over the CIA. So CIA is an agency. There are actually 16 intelligence agencies. Above that is the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That's General James Clapper. So I work for them, and they asked me to put together a private sector panel. There's something, the name's going to hurt your head. It's called CFIUS, C-F-I-U-S. It's the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Whenever a foreign company buys a U.S. company, they have to go through a national security review. Now, if a friend of ours like the UK wants to buy Ben & Jerry's ice cream, nobody cares. But if a Chinese telecommunications company like Huawei wants to buy Verizon, forget about it. They're not going to be allowed to buy that. So this is designed to protect our critical infrastructure. But on the other hand, the Treasury and the Department of Commerce sort of favor this because we got to get our money back, right? Because we borrowed $2 trillion from them. So there's a struggle between, say, the Treasury on the one hand and the intelligence community and the Department of Defense on the other. Are we going to let China buy these companies or not? So, but Pastor, there are quite a few acquisitions pending. Every one of them, at least the big ones, get this national security
Well, we've
review.
just learned the last few weeks, China's bought our theaters.
Right.
Most of the theaters in America, the big chains now, are owned by China.
Right.
And
Well-
they've actually changed the movies
Sure.
to adjust to their new rules.
Yeah, well, this is like living in any repressed society. You go to, I travel to China. There's no Twitter. You can't use the internet the way we use it here. It's all blocked. Same thing in Russia.
There's a headline today. There's so many headlines. The day you arrive, we get all this news. Did you know that the U.S. Army has announced that we are stockpiling munitions, armament, near China? And the question is on the headline that's in the news today, will this trigger World War III? And we're stocking munitions in the news here. It says Vietnam, Cambodia, other countries around, things circling China. Are you aware of this going on?
I am. I follow it very closely, and it could cause World War III, but let me explain why. There's a body of water called the South China Sea, big body of water, and it kind of looks like an egg. If you draw all the land around it, it looks like a kind of an egg. There are 6 countries around it: the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and China. So those are the 6 countries around the South China Sea. Under different international treaties, everybody would be entitled to a slice. You get your slice and all that. China claims the whole thing. They say, hey, it's got our name on it. It's the South China Sea, right? So they claim the whole thing, which means they are in a confrontation with 5 other nations. Some of these countries, not all of them, but some of them have treaties with the United States, particularly the Philippines. Now, what are they doing to back up their claim? I think our viewers and the audience know this. They're building artificial islands. So maybe there's a rock. Okay, let's say the rock might not be bigger than this stage, okay? But if it's above the surface, the area around is shallow. So they send in dredges. They're dredging up all the sand. They're building artificial reefs. Then they started putting military bases on it, ports, airstrips. Now they've got the military in there. They're sending out patrols. They're saying, this is all ours. Now, the United States has been cruising by, flying over, saying, no, it's not. But how do you actually back that up? And that's what this is stocking, the headline you reported to, Pastor Jim, stocking this is preparing for that. And we do have allies in the area. But here's how I see World War III. Does anybody want World War III? Of course not. Would anybody be out to start World War III? No. But sometimes wars happen by accident. In other words, and it's a lot like the financial system. You get into this critical state, and it only takes one little spark to burn it all down, and it's not anything anybody wants. So I don't know if have some sailors. I've sailed a lot at night. I do a lot of sailing. You hit things, you try not to, but being on the water at night, even with modern technology and GPS, is tricky. So imagine a Chinese cruiser accidentally bumps into a Filipino fishing boat, and heaven forbid the boat sinks and 20 Philippine fishermen are killed, and Philippines decides they've got to stand up and respond by, interdicting that cruiser. And then this is what I mean by accident. Well, when everyone's armed to the teeth, fighting over territory, and then accidents happen, it can spin out of control.
We'll be right back with our special guest, James Rickards, after this little message. James is speaking to the world. This guest today is renowned all over the world. But every time I turn on the radio or television, I hear him telling people this year could be the collapse, the financial collapse, that he said that will literally change the world. And here he is now on our broadcast.
Yes,
and
with that same message, warning the people.
That's
and,
right.
And we'll be right back to him. But it's time to prepare, people. It's time to get ready. Last week in Brussels, Belgium, a terrorist attack, just almost like none other except 9/11. But this attack literally closed down a city of 1 million people.
That's right.
For several days. So the fact is that many, many more, they're going to do an attack where thousands will die. Hundreds of thousands will die, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well,
In fact, they plan to attack America and literally maybe attack 50 and 100 cities at one time. What do they call that again?
They call it a day of jihad.
A day of jihad. And what would happen in America when they declare this day and they set bombs in dozens and dozens and dozens of cities, one right after another, shopping malls, churches, stores, schools? Where will the people go? What will they do, do you think?
I honestly believe they will completely stay home. It will change America as we know it. If you can imagine several cities being attacked in one day from a day of jihad, adults, people are not going to be going to work. So the economy is going to suffer. Parents are not going to be sending their kids to school. That means that no one's going to be going out. Grocery stores, it'll be a ghost. You've heard of a ghost town. It'll be a ghost country. Everybody will be staying at home. And most likely, if this really did occur, a day of jihad throughout all of America, most likely martial law would be instituted.
This attack in Brussels, Belgium, I've been listening, I followed it, and they're saying the experts did not know it was coming.
Wow, unreal.
And for the first time, they're using channels, and yet there was so much chatter, they said, but yet they said they really didn't know. But yet they said there was so much
That's unreal.
that I think what's happening, it's like a blizzard. You can't see anymore.
Wow.
So the blizzard of all the activity, all the internet, all the stuff going on, and they said they knew it was coming, but yet they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't know what was coming. And so what's happening? Just exactly what ISIS said. And they said the United States is next. ISIS says an event bigger than 9/11 is coming. I believe we need leadership that will stand up and come against this force. But we must be ready. The great experts, all of them, James Rickard, who's on this program, he's warned us. The government cannot take care of all of us.
There's no way.
So if you don't have food, you don't have food. We're trying our best to help the people over in the Mideast.
That's right.
To stop the Christian genocide. It is happening. These people have had their children cut in two. They have had their heads cut off. They've been crucified on crosses. They've been put in boxes and burned. And now they've lost their homes. Most of all of the Christian cities in the Mideast are emptied out of Christians. They're in the woods. They're underground. They've run away. They're in camps. And they're starving to death.
Yeah.
Their children are skin and bones. And the church isn't doing anything. And America hardly lets in any Christians. If you're a Christian, it's for some reason, this is an anti-Christ society today.
That's right.
And we've got to help our dying church members in the Mideast.
That's right. If this genocide doesn't stop, there's not going to be any more Christianity in this region.
They're burning the churches down as well. They burnt their churches. They're burning their homes.
That's right.
They're destroying, or they just take their homes. And usually when they leave the city, they take their cars then. They say, give us your children or your car. So they give the cars. And their last little bit of stuff that's in there, and they maybe are allowed to carry a blanket or something, but even that, they're just sent off into the wilderness, into the mountains to die. And we are going to ship food. And if you'll start the club, here's something you can do. If you say, Jim, I will give $165 a month for 6 months, you could give enough food, and I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
How that adds up to a year?
After 6 months
And a half.
You'll actually, yes, have a year and a half of food at your home, and you'll have sent 300 days of food to the Middle East.
Now, you're not just providing for yourself, which is so good. You need to do that. This 90-day bucket is $165. If you just want to get one, then we will send with the owners of our
Augustin Farms,
and we're going to ship these buckets. These square buckets fit in a container, and we can do 2,000 more per container by using this bucket. It takes up all the space because it's square, and they just all tuck in that. And we're going to start shipping as soon as you get your orders in here, and as soon as we get enough to ship maybe one container. But we want, if we get enough people giving for 2 or 3, we'll do it. We need to get the food because they're dying right now. And if we give to them, what does God say? He said, you loan to God.
That's right.
When you give to the poor, you loan to God. And God, listen, He pays dividends. And it's time we take over. I believe it will. The only thing that'll save America is turning to God. And one of the things we do when we serve God is we help other people. And we help starving people. God just, He talks about giving to the poor. That's probably one of the number one subjects. I could go with scriptures all day long.
That's right. It talks about in the book of Proverbs, whenever you lend to the poor, you're lending to God, and God Himself will repay you.
Amen. And so remember, order one bucket now is 90 days, and the bucket of 50 days is going to stop Christian genocide now. Amen?
Amen.
We can do it. Come on, everybody do it. Don't say, well, I will do it later. Nobody ever does it later. You got to do it now. Help me. Now listen, if you want to do the 6 month, so there is what comes to your house, and how many
This is a
months is that?
This is a year and a half of food.
A year and a half of, if you pledge this 6 month deal, you'll have a year and a half of food stored in your basement or stored in your closet, and you will have sent 6 of these buckets to the Mideast to help feed the Church of Jesus Christ.
Amen. That's 300 days of food.
You know, we've had our guest on our program warning of this day. And we have millions, I know, that believe the Bible.
Yeah.
But there's others who just say, well, I think Jim might be right, but we'll wait and see. Well, it'll be too late. You'll be too late soon. Well, one more. This is the year.
Yes.
This would be cool if you would pledge a year of food. You get one of these buckets to your house. Can be on auto give. Just every month, you just give them a credit card number, and this will come to the house. And how many years of food then do you get?
You'll have 3 years of food.
3 years of food in 1 year.
That's right. And for every bucket, we're sending a 50-day bucket to the Middle East. So after a year, you'll have sent 600 days of food to the Middle East.
You know, Joseph had 7 years to prepare.
Yeah.
I want you to be a giver. I want you to have something right here. What have you got? How many now? 2 years? Is this 2 years?
It's a total of 3 years of food.
3 years.
Yes.
If they give $165
every month.
a month, in 1 year, they have 3 years of food for themselves.
That's right.
That's amazing. Look at all this food right here. And then you have given this much to the poor, to the dying people in the Mideast. Christians, their churches are burnt to the ground. their shrines, the statues, the beautiful things from, even 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
They're destroying everything.
Yeah.
And what has America done?
Yeah.
Very little. Our leaders won't do anything. And it's time we do something.
Amen.
And we're giving you, literally, will give a what we call a year, but that's 12 buckets of food. Every
right.
month, you'll be sending a bucket of food to someone that's a family that's starving.
Yes.
That's right.
Can you imagine handing this heavy bucket of food? And people, they're in the woods. They're in a camp with possibly, at the best, they might have a tent, but usually they don't even have anything. But they're given this and said, here's some food. And they've got 50 days of food in one bucket. Wow. And these buckets can store other things if they can collect them. Then they're a collecting bucket. They can go get water in this bucket.
Yes.
They can use it as a little toilet. It is afterwards. It's so many things. This is so practical, but this will fill up 2,000 more buckets than if we use this bucket.
That's right.
For the ship.
That's right. Yeah, it was much wiser to use these square buckets. Like you said, we can fit 2,000 to 3,000 more buckets in a container because they're square rather than round.
Call 1-888-988-1588 or write to Jim Bakker, P.O. Box 7330, Branson, Missouri 65615. All of our products are available on our website at jimbakkershow.com. Thank you for your prayers and support that help keep us broadcasting around the world.
Michael, I watch you and I know that your brain is going 100 miles an hour. And honestly, you can jump in. Is there anything so far you want to, on this program, that you want to ask?
Yeah, I think a lot of people might want to get a word from you about what's going on in the stock market right now, because we've seen some crazy things. You go back to August, and we saw really the greatest financial shaking since 2008. And, August comes, all of a sudden we see stocks crash dramatically worldwide. At one point, $11 trillion of wealth globally had been wiped out in stock markets all over the world. So we're kind of seeing this great W pattern where we saw that first leg down. Then U.S. markets started to rebound a bit. They didn't rebound to the same level they were before. So it's kind of this leaning W forming. So there was the rebound. Then we get to January and February, and all hell starts to break loose all over the place.
Right.
Stock markets all over the world start crashing again. People are panicking. People are freaking out. I was on the show about that time. Everyone was talking about it. So we saw this another huge leg down, another leg of the W. Now, over the past few weeks, we've seen, particularly in the United States, stocks start to rebound. And so we're forming that last leg of this leaning W. It hasn't got, in both cases, stocks have never rebounded to where they were before, so it's kind of the stair step down.
Right.
And now you've got kind of this leaning W that's forming, but then overall, if you go back to 2014, you've kind of got this it looks like a grand bubble, kind of a dome where the stock market was going up, and you had your ups and downs, but if you look at the trend going up, then it peaked mid-2015, and then if you trace it back, and I've actually got a chart that depicts this on my latest article on the Economic Collapse blog. But so you've kind of got this huge dome forming. So what are people to make of it? Because in the short term, a lot of people say, well, the stock market's going up for a couple weeks. The crisis must be over. What is your perspective on what we're seeing? We've certainly seen the greatest financial shaking since the last financial crisis. Has something already begun? Are we in the early chapters of something? What is your take on all of this?
I think something has begun, and just to kind of go your chronology, Mike, I'd go back a little bit further to November 2014. I think that was a very significant date. Now, the all-time high for the stock markets approximately was May 2015. It hit that peak, and then it backed off, and then it's come up. It didn't get back all the way. Then it went down again, exactly what you described. It's struggling back up, but doesn't make it all the way, and then the next leg down takes it even lower. But November 2014 was also a peak, and then it slightly surpassed that. So it's kind of what they call a head and shoulders. But it looks to me like the economy really hit stall speed in November 2014. I saw a very interesting phenomenon, which is some people say gold is a commodity. I actually say gold is a chameleon. And I have this in my book. So gold can be a commodity, it can be an investment, or it can be money. In my view, it's money. If you think about gold as money, it actually solves a lot of riddles. That's the easiest way to think about it. But I recognize that the market treats it as different things at different ways at different times. Now, there's a commodity index. Gold is in the index, but so are 15 other things, silver and iron ore and oil and a bunch of other things. Now, you would expect that gold and the index would move together because gold's in the index, so gold goes like this and the index goes like this, and indeed they do. They exhibit what's called a high degree of correlation. But in November 2014, they went in opposite directions. The commodity index continued to plunge, mainly because of the price of oil, but gold started to go up. And what that told me is that something had changed, that gold was no longer acting like a commodity, it was starting to act like money. People were losing confidence in the other forms of money and saying, I want some of that gold money to preserve my wealth. And that has persisted ever since. The commodity complex, it's kind of at the bottom. It's not going down more, but it's chugging along at the bottom, and gold continues to go up. So to me, gold, it's like you put a chameleon on a green leaf, it's green. You put it on a brown tree trunk, it's brown. Gold now looks like it has switched character from a commodity to money, and is competing with dollars, euros, and these other things. Now, as far as the stock market is concerned, the problem with manipulation, and the stock market is manipulated by the Federal Reserve through low interest rates. I explained that earlier. If they don't pay you anything for your savings, the message is, hey, go. You want to make some money, go buy stocks. They're forcing everyone into the stock market. The problem with manipulation is there's no end to it, right? You start propping up the market. Well, what happens when you remove the props? It collapses. So you got to keep those balls, it's like juggling. You got to keep the balls in the air. So in May 2015, it peaked. Now, August 2015, with the Chinese devaluation, it crashed. You're right. Well, why did it go back up again? Well, everyone thought the Federal Reserve was going to raise interest rates in September 2015. They didn't. They took a pass. So if I expect you to raise rates and you do nothing, that's like a rate cut. Like if I'm kind of priced for this and you come in here, it's like you cut rates. So that was a form of monetary ease, and that got the stock market going back up again. Then what happened? Well, in December, they finally did raise rates. It was called the liftoff. So Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve actually raised rates. And I said before that, I did expect them to raise rates in December, but I said this will be an historic blunder. This will be right up there with 1928, 1929, when the Fed tightened at the wrong time. By the way, the Fed should have raised interest rates in 2010, 2011. That was the time to raise rates because the U.S. economy it wasn't great, but it was doing okay. But they missed it. They missed the whole cycle. Two wrongs don't make a right. The fact that you should have raised in 2011 and didn't doesn't mean that you're supposed to raise now when you shouldn't. Again, two wrongs don't make a right. So they raised in December. Stock market falls out of bed January and February. You're exactly right. Then, of course, with the Fed, it's not just the announcements. It's the signaling. You have to be a geek like me and read all these speeches and read certain reporters and all that. They began to signal that they weren't going to raise rates in March because in December, they said, not ironclad, but they implied they were going to raise rates 4 times in 2016. So that would be March, June, September, and December. Those would be the 4 meetings. That's what they said. Well, by early February, they started to signal, maybe it's only going to be 2, or maybe it's only going to be 3. They more or less told the markets they weren't going to raise in March. What happened? The stock market came roaring back, but technically not back to the old level. Well, what's going to happen next? Right? Because this never ends. And we just had yesterday was the Federal Reserve Board March meeting. Probably heard about it or read about it. Well, we got past it. They didn't raise rates. That gave the stock market some juice. But now we got to start talking about June. I wish we had other things to talk about than the Fed, but if they're manipulating the world, then we've got to pay attention. So now it really looks like they want to raise interest rates in June. Why do I put so much emphasis on June? Because the next meeting is September, which is 45 days before the election. And I keep out of politics. Believe me, I'm an economics geek. But Janet Yellen, this is no secret, Janet Yellen, chairman of the Fed, is a well-known liberal, Democrat, labor economist. You think she's going to raise rates 45 days before the election and sink a Democratic ticket? No. So they'll skip September, so they already skipped March. Probably going to skip September for political reasons. So if they're going to raise them at all, it pretty much comes down to June. And they're already starting to signal that. So going to this chronology we just laid out, if they start saying we're going to raise rates in June, what's going to happen to stocks? They're going to go down. So it is a seesaw, jigsaw, whatever you want to call it, but it's all manipulated by the Fed.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Michael, by the way?
It did. It did. I was just going to follow up. At the same time, we're seeing the underlying economic fundamentals start to decay. We're seeing, for example, we just got the numbers from China, the latest export numbers, where their exports fell 25% compared to last year for February. U.S. exports have been sliding for a month. Industrial production has fallen now. I think it's 4 months in a row. Retail sales have fallen 2 months in a row. U.S. exports are down, and this pattern we haven't seen since the last 2 recessions. All these fundamental economic numbers, we're seeing less stuff bought and sold all over the world. We're seeing less real economic activity. Would you say the real economy is ahead of the financial markets and the financial markets will catch up at some point? Or there seems to be this disconnect between the financial markets and what's really happening all over the planet? South America's in a depression, in Brazil and other places. So what are people to make of that in terms of this disconnect between the overall global economy and what's happening, the real economic activity, and then the financial markets? Yeah, they've come down, but they still seem to be much higher than they should be based on perhaps the real economic numbers.
Right. First of all, I agree completely that the U.S. economy is fundamentally weak. And I just got back from Europe. I was with a group of European high net worth and institutional investors, and I said this, and they were all shocked because all they hear about is the U.S. economy is doing great. I said, not so great. Maybe doing better than some other places around the world, but from the inside the U.S., it doesn't look so great. And all the reasons that you mentioned, Michael, you'll hear that auto sales are up. Auto sales are at an all-time high. Those are sales from the manufacturer to the dealers. They ship them out of Detroit, they count as a sale. That doesn't mean dealer sales. The inventories are at an all-time high. In other words, Detroit's shipping the cars, but they're piling up on dealer lots. Final sales, like you and me walking in and buying a car, those are weak. And what's happening is the inventories are piling up. It's just a matter of time before the dealer calls up Detroit and says, you know what, I got enough cars, see you later. So that's going to turn around. I think look, I talked about the Fed manipulating markets, which they do for the reasons we've described, but there's something bigger than the Fed. That's the real economy. It's all of us and all of you and all the viewers. We are the real economy. We wake up in the morning. Sometimes we feel like spending money. Sometimes we don't. And that makes a big difference psychologically and behaviorally. And that is really what's hurting us right now. People don't have confidence. A lot of the trade is down. People talk about the trade deficit or the trade surplus. Did you export more than you import? It's important. But what's happening is that exports and imports are both going down. So you'll hear about we had a trade deficit or trade surplus, but look at the gross numbers. They're both going down. For exports and imports both to decline, that's rare. That's rare. That only happens in recessions and depressions. So that's happening. Manufacturing's rolling over. It's starting to leach into the service sector. They say, well, we created, 240,000, whatever the exact number was, jobs last month. And that's fine. But what's happening is we lose one job in the oil patch. Let's say it's a $100,000, engineering job, and we get 3 bartenders and waitresses. Now, I love bartenders and waitresses. Let me be clear. And there's dignity in all work. So I am not denigrating any work. There's dignity in all work. But if you have 3 $25,000 a year bartenders and you lose one $100,000 a year oil patch engineer, you've created 2 jobs. You lost one, you got 3. So you could say we created 2 jobs. But all of that purchasing power together doesn't make up what you just lost. So aggregate wages, aggregate demand is going down. And these are the things that are troubling the U.S. economy. Now, the financial markets are responding to the Fed. They're not really responding. They're responding to things like stock buybacks that when we started the show, we talked about that. And so...
And that still is weighing on me. I've been thinking about in the last 5 minutes again, because big corporations, instead of building new factories, new plants, and stuff, they're buying their stock back.
Right.
And they're buying billions of dollars of stock so they can make the stock market go up. And so I've always wondered, who's manipulating this market?
Well, let me give you a simple example. So let's say I'm a corporation, and I have 100. I'll keep the numbers small just for illustration. I have 100 shares, and I make $100. So my earnings are $1 per share. Okay? So now I go out and I buy back 75 shares. So I only have 25 shares, and I make $50. Well, I just made $2 per share. So when you turn on CNBC, it says earnings per share went from $1 to $2. Earnings per share doubled. Yeah, but the actual earnings went from $100 to $50. The reason the earnings per share went up is because I bought back the shares. I don't have as many shares. So this is like 7th grade math, but the point is, so earnings per share are going up, but did my actual earnings go up? Did my top line go up? Or do I just have fewer shares? Well, in my example, I made 100, it was $1 per share, I made 50, and it's $2 per share. But that's because I bought back all the stock. The shares aren't outstanding. But I look at the 100 going down to 50 and say, that company's going out of business. So that's what's going on. This is called financial engineering.
How long can this go on?
Not much longer, not given...
You have to produce at some point.
Correct. And
is that right, or am I stupid?
You're not stupid, in that you have to produce something, and all the financial engineering, balance sheet games, accounting games, leverage, all the things we're talking about, they can create the appearance of successful stock markets
We will
for a
be
while, but
right
eventually
back
the real
after
economy
this
catches
special
up to you.
message.
Last week there was a horrible attack in Brussels, Belgium. The airport has been completely closed for several days.
That's right.
Our enemies are the same enemies as the enemies of Brussels, as Paris, as England.
And the same type of threats that they said that there was coming to Brussels are the same type of threats that they say is coming to America.
And when we try to warn, and people that, like some of our guests that have been here, have tried to warn us about ISIS.
Yes. Like Brigitte Gabriel,
Yes.
like General Jerry Boykin, and many others.
And who claimed that they were responsible? The Islamic State claimed responsibility.
That's right. They're even celebrating it.
And, basically dancing in the streets over it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying they're going to do the same thing to America. In fact, their number one goal is to drop an EMP bomb on the United States of America. What does that mean? That's the electrical magnetic bomb that will shut our power down, shut the grid down, shut the water down, shut the sewers down, shut all transportation down. Airplanes would drop out of the sky at that moment, no movement. And in a year's time, they tell us up to 95% of America would be dead. You don't want to be in the dark, as well as, of course, death is the ultimate goal of our enemies.
That's right.
But putting us in the dark, not being able to have any communication, not to be able to run any communication systems, not be able to have lights, not to be able to even play a CD or a DVD. And we are almost out of our wonderful fuelless generator. This unit has been the most amazing product that I've ever discovered.
Yes.
And we have them at our house, and they were right at $3,500 when we decided that we were going to go with a new version that was going to be created, and it's still being worked on. So
That's
it's
right.
not ready to ship it. But we have the last of these, and believe me, this has had the least problems of any item I think I've ever offered on the show. And I have 4 of them at my house, and I wouldn't live without them.
And we ended up bringing the price all the way down to $2,000. And then we actually ended up running out of the hand cranks. And the hand cranks are for a retail value of $216. So we actually knocked that off of the donation price as well. So you can get a generator, the solar panel, and the 50-foot solar extension cord for a donation of only $1,784 to the ministry.
And you will have your best friend besides Jesus, this generator, fuelless generator, to have this in your house, even if you just have a storm and the power goes out.
That's right.
This is your fuelless generator. It comes with the panel. Here's one right here. It folds up like a briefcase, suitcase, and you can put it in your trunk. You can carry it wherever you want to go. So if you have to run away from your house, you grab this. There's a handle on it. You grab it. You pick it up.
You just put it in the back of your car and you're ready to go.
And you put this. This has a handle on it right here.
Yes, it does.
Here it is. And you just take this. You grab this. You put this in your car. You put the solar panel in your car, then you put the cords. The cord comes with it, 20 foot long.
That's
a
right.
$50 cord.
Yes.
That comes with it. And then, of course, you have the electrical cord. You want
Yes.
to always have that in case, if the electricity is on. So soon as you get this, make sure it's charged up. It should be
Yes.
charged up when you get it.
Just plug
But
it straight into the
plug
wall.
this into the wall, and you will have it all charged up, and it'll stay charged up for a long, long time.
Yes.
In fact, in a year, it's probably 95% still
Yes.
charged up after
That's
a
right.
year.
And one of the most incredible things about this, many of our viewers don't know this, but you can actually put up to 3 solar panels in the unit at one time. Now, one solar panel already comes with it, but we're doing a special right now. The solar panel has a retail value of $500. You can get another solar panel for a donation of $450 to the ministry, and we're throwing in as an extra bonus the $50 20-foot solar extension cord as well.
That's right.
I'm telling you, people the last few days are ordering like crazy. They're going to be gone.
Yeah.
The panels are worth $500. That's the retail value.
Yes.
And we're doing it for $450. And so you get on top of that the cord, which is a $50 cord. You're getting that with it.
That's right.
And so it's about $100 off
That's
from
right.
this deal right here. And if you would like to be able to plug in 3, you get one with it. So if you order 2 more, you will be able to charge this generator up in like 2 hours.
That's right.
That's right.
And you have a full charge, which will run you the whole next night. It'll just run you all night long. I put 3 of them on my roof is what I
Yes.
did. I actually have 6. I have 3 above the bedroom and 3 above the kitchen. And so I have them, so I put a cord down and made a plug-in right in the house. So these cords are just plug right in together.
That's right.
And it's an amazing thing. So if you want to get one of these for $450 and it unfolds, you can see it out there unfolded, but it comes like this for $450, and you will get the cord, the 20-foot cord that plugs right here into here, and it plugs in. And as we closed them out, the factory that we get these gave to you a grill
Yes, the foldable grill.
and a
A
pot to
cooking
cook
pot.
in
Yes.
and a whole bunch of food. But
The 72 hours for 2 people. This all comes with your generator when you order it today.
this is so great for a grab and go bag. If you don't have your grab and go bag, you always need a grab and go bag. I'll tell you what, our enemies, the same enemies that destroyed the airport at Brussels, Belgium,
Yeah.
that group of people are the same ones that said they're going to destroy America. I mean, when I saw that airport being bombed and the people running, I thought, my Lord, another 9/11. That's what it looked like. The people running, the people screaming. And they're planning another 9/11, only they want to top what they did at 9/11.
That's right.
So what I'm saying is, if you ever get ready, do it now. One day it's going to be too late. Remember, God loves you. He really does. Bye-bye for today.
Bye bye. We love you.